So the GenAI bubble hasn't burst yet, but we have started to see the first signs that it's creaking. And most of those signs have come from general pushback from the public, not from the tech sector. And we've seen that pushback in several events recently, from Larian getting significant pushback from their announcement that they're increasing the use of GenAI in the early stage of the development of the next Divinity game, to the Clair Obscur devs seeing their Indie Game of the Year award being stripped away from them because of admitting to the use of GenAI. We already knew that Clair Obscur used GenAI in their development. It was the case when it was first launched. They had to patch out some what looked like mid-journey images that had still been left in the game after launch. I've already spoken about Larian, but in the case of the Clair Obscur dev Sandfall, I'm not that bothered by the fact that some games companies used GenAI very early in the process. When Clair Obscur was first in development, the first GenAI engines were being spun up without full knowledge of what they were doing in order to produce that material. And some of that stuff looks like it's very early mid-journey. The bigger problem is that they lied to the Indie Game Awards in order to be put in for nomination. Because the Indie Game Awards make it clear that if you've used GenAI during your game development, you are not eligible for the Indie Game Awards, and yet Sandfall nominated themselves anyway. The pushback from awards goes beyond gaming, as we saw from the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers Association. They attempted to change their rules to make it more permissible for writers to have used GenAI during their work and still be eligible for awards, as long as not all of what they wrote was written using GenAI. The pushback was so hard and fast from the members of that association that they ended up rolling back those rules and bringing in much harder rules against the use of GenAI in writing within hours, as it became very obvious that writers would not accept the use of technology built on the theft of their work being used in order to be rewarded from their association. And it is important and meaningful that these awards and industry bodies take a strong line against GenAI, because that does influence the decisions of creators. When they see that their works will not be eligible for rewards if they use GenAI as part of the process, that is a really strong incentive not to use any GenAI. When you see publishers starting to weigh up whether or not they should replace artists with GenAI slop for covers, they will think twice when it means that if they do so, that book will no longer be eligible for any industry awards. We've seen a tiny minority of writers push back on these new rules because they see GenAI as inevitable, and they see GenAI being plugged into all kinds of software which might incidentally be used by writers such as themselves and leave them ineligible for these rewards. But the fact is that GenAI isn't inevitable, and also there's no good reason why they have to use tools that use that GenAI. Even Microsoft, which has tried to shove GenAI into literally every part of Windows, including all parts of Microsoft Office, are starting to scale back because people aren't using it. They dramatically cut their sales forecast for GenAI technology just last month, because it turns out that people don't want it. They're not paying any extra money for software that has GenAI in it because it's not that useful. So if even the company that has most to gain from people increasing their GenAI use is starting to scale back because it's just not seeing pickup, how does that lead to a conclusion that it's not only inevitable, but so useful that anyone who doesn't use it will be made obsolete? A bunch of people responded to the Sandfall and Larian news by claiming every games company is using GenAI in their development process, and then studiously ignoring all the indie devs who said, no, we're not. We don't want to use it, either because it's not that useful, because the technology is bad, or because we have moral beliefs that prevent us from using technology built on the theft of the work of our peers. This belief that GenAI is not only inevitable, but so incredibly useful that anyone who doesn't use it will be made obsolete, and therefore you just have to use it, is based on willfully ignoring the reality around us, willfully ignoring the people who aren't using it and are still having great successes, all in order to enable people who need an excuse not to feel bad about its use. And I think industry awards and professional associations pushing back on that by just saying, you can use it if you like, but if you do, you're not getting rewarded by us, is an important norm shift. It's an important limiter on that ability for people to just enter denialism and think up excuses built on ignoring the people who are still succeeding despite rejecting GenAI. We've seen what GenAI actually does to creative process. We've seen what it actually does to the work of people who end up relying on it. It makes their work worse. It makes them worse at doing the things that they were previously good at. It reduces their cognitive abilities. It produces bad slop content, which people end up seeing as generic and unvaluable. We saw that pretty clearly when you compare the significant pushback about the GenAI ads from Coca-Cola and McDonald's and compare it to the enormous praise seen to advertising that was using traditional art styles. The French animation studio Wiz just taught those mega corporations a lesson by producing an ad for a supermarket using traditional animation, which was widely beloved and incredibly successful because it was custom and used art. GenAI isn't just not inevitable, it's increasingly clear that people don't want it. And it's not people not using it who are going to be in a disadvantage in the future. It's increasingly going to be the people who have sacrificed their actual skills in order to rely upon it. And in doing so, sacrificing not only a wide audience of people who don't want those products, but also their ability to be respected for those skills as they're rejected by award bodies who rightfully see no place for GenAI.